Well, what do you know? Here we are again on the campus of St. Bonaventure High School. Max is still behind the camera. Obviously, I'm still in front of the camera. And welcome to the newest episode of the OLA Adult Dad Faith Formation Weekly Gospel Podcasts, where we get to sit down for a couple of minutes every week and unpack the Sunday Gospel reading. So, as I always say, when we hear it proclaimed on Sunday, we'll have a better understanding of and a better appreciation for what the Word of God has for us. This Sunday is the feast of the dedication of the Lateran Basilica in Rome. And the gospel passage the church gives us to celebrate this feast is from the Gospel of John. So even though we're in the year of Luke, we're going to jump out of Luke this week into the Gospel of John. We're going to be in John chapter 2, verses 13 to 22, John's recording of the cleansing of the temple. So, since this is the feast of the dedication of the Lateran Basilica in Rome, the church gives us the cleansing of the Old Testament temple, sort of fits, John 2, verses 13 to 22. And a couple of things up front, because we always say, right, context, 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 and read, watch, and listen because words have meaning. A couple of background notes that, may provide some context and would give us kind of a fuller appreciation for this reading is there's 4 actual basilicas in Rome. There's St. Peter's Basilica. There's St. John Lateran, which is the dedication we're celebrating today. There's Mary Major, and there's St. Paul outside the walls. So 4 basilicas in Rome. This is the Lateran Basilica, and we're celebrating the feast day of the dedication of it. Now, the other thing that we might want to bring out is, you might say, well, wait a second. Those of you that are watching, listening, and reading closely, right? You might be saying, well, wait a second. This is the cleansing of the temple. Doesn't that happen toward the end of Jesus' public ministry? And yes, it does. It happens on Monday of Holy Week. Okay? Well, then you might say, wait a second. This is chapter 2 of John. All right? So why does John record it, the 2nd chapter of his gospel, when the other 3 synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they record it when it actually happened at the end of Jesus' public ministry? They record it toward the end of their gospels. And some of the thinking has been, well, that's because there was 2 different cleansings, once at the beginning and once at the end, and that's incorrect. There's only one cleansing of the temple. It happens on Monday of Holy Week. That being the case, why does John record it not at the end of his gospel like the others do, but at the beginning of it? Well, unlike the synoptics, right, John's gospel is not recorded in any kind of an orderly fashion, right? It's recorded really to bring out Jesus's divinity, his authority over nature and sin and disease and sickness. It's to bring out the fact that he is the Christ, the Son of God. He is a divine person as well as a human person, okay? So by putting the cleansing of the temple early on in the Gospel of John, what John is doing, if John's purpose, one of his purposes is to bring out Jesus's authority over all these things, as we'll see in this passage, the Jewish religious leaders, after Jesus cleanses the temple, the very question they ask him is, by what authority do you do this? So the Jewish religious leaders questioning Jesus' authority to cleanse the temple, you put that next to one of John's themes is bringing out the authority of Jesus. When better to put this particular event at the beginning of John's gospel? It's as if John is saying, okay, one theme I'm going to try and bring out is the authority of Jesus. The cleansing of the temple, Jesus' authority is questioned. So I'm going to put that at the very beginning of my gospel because it fits into the theme of Jesus has authority, right? So that's why it's at the beginning of John's gospel where the other one's recorded at the end. And that's why there's not two cleansings, there's just one cleansing. So with all of that as background, let's see how John records this event. John 2, verses 13 to 22. Since the Passover of the Jews was near, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. He found in the temple area, and we know the story, those who sold oxen, sheep, and doves, as well as the money changers seated there. All right. So we know the story well, right? Jesus is, it's Monday of Holy Week. He makes his triumphal entry on Sunday, right? Goes to the temple, sees what's happening, goes back to Bethany to spend Sunday night, and now it's Monday morning. He's going back into Jerusalem. He heads to the temple, and sure enough, what he saw the previous day is happening. You've got merchants selling sacrificial animals. You've got money changers changing coinage, right? And the problem with that context is, again, the Passover was one of 3 pilgrim feasts. So if you were a devout Jewish person, you would have to celebrate the Passover in Jerusalem at the temple, right? It would have been very difficult to, because a lot of these people, they were coming from long distances. It would have been very difficult to bring the animal you were going to sacrifice with you if you were going a long distance, because that animal had to be unblemished. And if you're traveling a long distance, things could happen to it. It could get stolen, right? Thieves. It could trip and break a bone or get nicked, right? So it was much more convenient to travel to Jerusalem, buy your sacrificial animal there, okay, exchange your money there, and then go into the temple. So the fact that there were merchants selling animals and money changers changing money, that was a necessary feature, and that was very convenient. So if we were, like I said, if we were back in first century, Judaism, it's the Passover. We got to travel to Jerusalem. All right. We arrive in Jerusalem. We exchange our coinage for temple coinage. We take that temple coinage. We use it to buy our sacrificial animal, and we sacrifice it. It's all done on site. Okay. Very convenient. The problem is that over time, the Jewish religious leaders brought these merchants and money changers from outside the temple, in the parking lot, so to speak, even though there weren't any cars, and they brought them inside the temple area. And it made it very difficult to pray and to worship God with all this activity going on inside the very temple. So when Jesus spots this and gets angry, that's why he drives out the merchants and overturns the money changers' tables, okay? Because he says, okay, stop making my father's house a marketplace, right? And that's what they had done, okay? They had brought all of this activity, all of this financial activity, changing money, buying sacrificial animals inside the temple, and they had made the temple, his father's house, into a marketplace. That's what upset Jesus, so he drives that activity outside, right? Now, interestingly enough, when Jesus makes that statement, when he sees the money changers and the merchants and drives them out, he could have said anything, right? Why does he specifically say, stop making my father's house a marketplace? Why does he choose, as John records, why does he choose that particular phrase to say instead of any other phrase he could have chosen? Well, because by saying that phrase, he's referring back to 2 Old Testament prophecies. He's referring back to Isaiah 56, verse 7, and Jeremiah 7, verse 11. Let's see what Isaiah 56, 7 says. Isaiah prophesied. This is God speaking through the prophet Isaiah. My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations. Now let's jump to Jeremiah 7, verse 11. You have made it a den of thieves, right? So by combining the Isaiah prophecy with the Jeremiah prophecy, those prophets were prophesying that the day will come when God's house, the temple, right, will be turned from a house of prayer to a marketplace, to a den of thieves. That day, there's going to be a day where that will happen. Well, now that day has happened. And when Jesus says, stop making my Father's house a marketplace, he's saying it to the Jewish religious leaders who knew well their Old Testament, right? They knew this particular prophecy in Isaiah. They knew this particular prophecy in Jeremiah. So when Jesus says, stop making my Father's house a marketplace, he's in essence telling them, hey, what Isaiah and Jeremiah prophesied would happen, my Father's house going from a house of prayer to a marketplace, it's happening right now, and it's happening under your watch. You are fulfilling what Isaiah and Jeremiah prophesied would happen in the temple, right? So he's calling the Jewish religious leaders out for what they have been doing is actually fulfilling a prophecy that said that this would happen, right? Now, he clears out the temple, right? He clears out the merchants, he clears out the money changers, he makes that statement telling you guys have brought this prophecy into fulfillment, shame on you, essentially, right? Then John records, he said, there's a verse says, zeal for your house will consume me, right? Now, John recording that comes from Psalm 69, verses 7 to 12, right? Where that psalm, David and that psalmist had indicated, okay, that one day, okay, that the zeal for his Father's house being kept as a house of prayer rather than turned into a marketplace, his zeal to see that continue to happen will eventually consume Jesus, right? And it does, because when the Jewish religious leaders say, hey, what authority do you have for doing this? How does Jesus answer that? He says, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will rebuild it. Okay, it will be rebuilt. Right? Now, Jesus is referring to his death and his resurrection. So get the picture. Jesus comes in, sees the activity happening in the temple, drives the activity out, tells the Jewish religious, in effect, you are fulfilling what those two prophets said would happen. Shame on you. And the Jewish religious leaders say, whoa, wait a second. First things first, what authority do you have to even do this and say this to us? And then Jesus makes that statement, all right, about destroy the temple and in 3 days it'll be rebuilt. He's talking about his death and resurrection. He's not talking about the physical temple, all right? But the Jewish religious leaders don't pick up on that. They think he's talking about the actual physical temple, right? And they're incredulous. They're saying, well, it's taken 46 years to build this temple. You're going to rebuild it in 3 days? What are you even talking about? Well, he's not talking about the physical temple. He's talking about his body, okay? The death and resurrection. He's talking about him being the new temple, the everlasting temple, but they don't pick up on it. And so, John putting this at the beginning of his gospel fits perfectly into his theme, because John is trying to get across that Jesus is the Son of God. He is the Christ. He is the anointed one. He is the Messiah. He is the Savior. He is divine, right? And because of that, he has authority over the temple, over the Sabbath, over sickness, over disease, over sin, and ultimately over death. So John is beginning to start his theme of Jesus has authority by putting the very event where the Jewish religious leaders question his authority right at the beginning. All right? And again, Jesus foreshadows John foreshadows in Jesus's answer, destroy this temple, 3 days it'll be rebuilt. He's talking about his death and resurrection. John is foreshadowing Jesus' eventual death and resurrection, and he's doing it at the very beginning of his gospel. So with that, that's a little bit of background on why John puts the cleansing of the temple at the beginning of his gospel and his recording of this event and what he records of it as opposed to what the synoptics record of it. So with that, hopefully I've done a halfway decent job. You'll be the judge of that, but I'm looking at the monitor, 16 and a half minutes. So with that, we'll kind of bring this episode to the close. The dedication of the Lateran Basilica in Rome, the cleansing of the temple, John 2, verses 13 to 22. Until we sit down next week, I'm Charles Merritt. Take care and God bless.